Mortal Engines by Philip Reeve, Part 1, Chapter 19, The Sea of Khazak. A few hours later, as the evening mists came curling from the rust-water marshes, Tunbridge Wells rolled down to the edge of the sea. It paused there a while, gazing out towards a cluster of islands that rose, dark and rugged, from the silver water. Birds were streaming in off the sea in long skeins, and as the suburb cut its engines, the beat of their wings came echoing over the mudflats. Small waves beat steadily against the shore, and a wind from the east blew hissing through the thin grey marram grass. There was no other sound. No other movement, no light or smoke trail of a wandering town anywhere on the marshes or the sea. "Natsworthy!" shouted Chrysler Peavy, standing with a telescope to his eye at the window of his observation bridge high in the town hall. "Where is the lad, huh? Pass the word for Natsworthy." When a couple of his pirates ushered Tom and Hester in, he turned with a broad grin and held out the telescope, saying, "Take a look, Tommy. I told you I'd get you here, didn't I? I told you I'd get you through these marshes safe. Now have a look at where we're going." Tom took the telescope and put it to his eye, blinking at the trembling, blurred circle of view until it came clear. There were dozens of little islands speckling the sea ahead, and a larger one which loomed in the east like the back of an enormous prehistoric monster breaking the water. He lowered the telescope and shuddered. "But there's nothing there," he said. It had taken more than a week for Tunbridge Wells to pick its slow way through the quagmire, and although Chrysler Peavy had taken quite a shine to Tom, he had still not explained what he had hoped to find on the far side. His men had not been told either, but they were happy enough snapping up the tiny townships which had taken shelter in the mazes of the rust-water, semi-static places with moss-covered wheels and delicate, beautiful carvings on their wooden upperworks. They were so small that they were barely worth the taking, but Tunbridge Wells ate them anyway, and murdered or enslaved their people and fed the lovely carvings to its furnaces. It was a horrible, confusing time for Tom. He had been brought up to believe that municipal Darwinism was a noble, beautiful system, but he could see nothing noble or beautiful about Tunbridge Wells. He was still an honoured guest in the town hall, and so was Hester, although Peavy clearly didn't understand his attachment to the scarred, sullen, silent girl. "Why don't you ask my Cortina out?" he wheedled one night, sitting next to Tom in the old council chamber that was now his dining hall. "Or, why not one of them girls we took off the last catch, eh? Lovely lookers they was, and not a word of English, so they can't give you any lip." "Hester isn't my girlfriend," Tom started to say, but he didn't want to have to go out with the mayor's daughter, and he knew Peavy wouldn't understand the truth, that he was in love with the image of Catherine Valentine, whose face had hung in his mind like a lantern through all the miles of his adventures. So he said, "Hester and I have been through a lot together, Mr. Peavy. I promised I'd help her catch up with London." "But that was before," the mayor reasoned. "You're a Tunbridge Wellsian now. You're going to stay here with me, like the son I never had. And I'm just thinking, right, that maybe the lads would accept you a bit more easily if you had a better-looking girl, you know, more ladylike." Tom looked across the cluster of tables and saw the other pirates glaring at him, fingering their knives. He knew that they would never accept him. They hated him for being a soft city dweller and for being Peavy's favourite, and he couldn't really blame them. Later, In the little room he shared with Hester, he said, "We have to get off this town. The pirates don't like us, and they're starting to get tired of Peavy going on and on at them about manners and stuff. I don't even like to think about what will happen to us if they mutiny." "Let's wait and see," muttered the girl, curled up in a far corner. "Peavy's tough, and he'll be able to keep his lads in line, as long as he finds them this big catch he's been promising. But Quirk alone knows what it is." "We'll find out tomorrow," said Tom, drifting into an uneasy sleep. "This time tomorrow, these horrible bogs will be behind us." This time tomorrow, and the horrible bogs were behind them. As Peavy's navigator spread out his maps in the observation bridge, a strange hissing sound echoed up the stairwells of the town hall. Tom glanced up at the faces of Peavy's henchmen as they clustered around the chart table, but apart from Hester, no one seemed to have heard it. She looked nervously at him and shrugged. The navigator was a thin, bespectacled man named Mr. Ames. He'd been the suburb schoolteacher until Peavy took over. Now he was settling happily into his new life as a pirate. It was a lot more fun, and the hours were better, and Peavy's ruffians were better behaved than most of his old pupils. Smoothing his maps with his long, thin hands, he said, "It used to be the hunting ground for hundreds of little aquatic towns, but they all ate each other, and now anti-tractionist squatters have started coming down out of the mountains and settling up home on islands like this one." Tom craned closer. The great inland sea of Khazak was speckled with dozens of islands, but the one Ames was pointing to was the biggest, a tattered diamond shape some 20 miles long. He couldn't imagine what was so interesting about it, and most of the other pirates looked baffled too, but Peavy was chuckling and rubbing his hands together in glee. "The Black Island," he said. "Not much to look at, is it? But it's gonna make us rich, boys, rich. After tonight, old Tunbridge Wells will be able to set up as a proper city." "Oh yeah? How?" demanded Mungo, the pirate who trusted Chrysler Peavy least and most resented Tom. "There's nothing there, Peavy. Just a few old trees and some worthless mozzies." "What are mozzies?" whispered Tom to Hester. "He means people who live in static settlements," she hissed back. "You know, like that old saying, a rolling town gathers no moss." "The fact is, ladies and gentlemen," announced Peavy, "that there is something on the Black Island. A few days ago, just before you come aboard, Tom, we shot down an airship that was fooling about over the marshes. Its crew told me something very interesting before we killed him. It seems there's been a big battle up in Airhaven. Fires, engine damages, gas spills, the whole place knocked about so bad they couldn't stay up in the sky, but had to come down for repairs. And where do you think they've landed?" "Why, the Black Island," suggested Tom, guessing as much from Peavy's greedy grin. "That's my boy, Tommy! There's an air caravanserai there, where sky convoys refuel on their way up from the League's land south of the mountains. That's where Airhaven's put down. They think they're safe, with sea all round them, and their mozzie friends to help 'em. But they ain't safe from Tunbridge Wells!" A ripple of excitement spread through the assembled pirates. Tom turned to Hester, but she was staring out across the sea towards the distant island. Half of him was appalled by the thought that the lovely flying town was lying crippled there, waiting to be eaten. The other half was busy wondering how on earth Peavy planned to reach it. "To your stations, me hearties!" the pirate mayor yelled. "Fire up the engines, prime the guns. By dawn tomorrow, we'll all be rich!" The pirates scrambled to obey his orders, and Tom ran to the window. It was almost dark outside now, with a last ominous glow of sunset bruising the sky above the marshes. But the streets of Tunbridge Wells were full of light, and all around the edge of the suburb huge orange shapes were unfolding, growing like fungus in a speeded-up film. Now, the hissing from the lower deck made sense. While Peavy talked, his town had been busily pumping air into flotation chambers in these inflatable rubber skirts. "Let's go swimming!" shouted the pirate mayor, sitting back in his swivel chair and signalling the engine rooms. The huge motors rumbled into life. A plume of exhaust gases drifted aft, and Tunbridge Wells surged forward across the beach and into the sea. At first, all went well. Nothing stirred on the darkening waters as Tunbridge Wells went chugging eastward, and up ahead the Black Island grew steadily larger. Tom opened a small side window on the bridge and stood there, feeling the salt night air spill over him, feeling strangely excited. He could see the pirates gathering in the old market square at the suburb's forward end, readying grappling hooks and boarding ladders, because Airhaven would be far too large to fit into the jaws. They would have to take it by force and tear it apart at their leisure. He didn't like the idea, especially when he remembered that his aviator friends might still be on Airhaven, but it was a town-eat-town world after all. And there was something exciting about the cutthroat recklessness of Peavy's plan. And then, suddenly, something fell out of the sky and exploded in the market square, and there was a black gash in the deck, and the men he had been watching weren't there anymore. Others came, running with buckets and fire extinguishers. "Airship! Airship!" Someone was shouting, and then there were more rushing things, and buildings were exploding all over the suburb, with people flung tumbling high up into the air like mad acrobats. "For Salty Pig's sake!" shouted Peavy, running into the shattered observation window and staring down into the smoke-filled streets. His monkey jumped up and down on his shoulders, jabbering. "These mozzies are better organised than we gave them credit for," he said. "Searchlights! Quick!" Two wavering fingers of light rose above the town, feeling their way across the smoke-dappled sky. Where they met, Tom saw a fat rising shape shine briefly red. The suburb's guns swung upward and fired a rippling broadside, and pulses of flame stalked the drifting clouds. "Missed," hissed Peavy, squinting through his telescope. "Curse it! I should have known Airhaven would send up spotter ships, and if I'm not mistaken, it was that witch-fanged old rust bucket." "The Jenny Hanover," gasped Tom. "No need to sound so pleased about it," snarled Peavy. "She's a menace. Ain't you heard of the Windflower?" Tom hadn't told the pirate mayor of his adventures aboard Airhaven. He tried to hide his happiness at the thought that Miss Fang was still alive and said, I've heard of her. She's an air trader." "Oh, yeah?" Peavy spat on the deck. "You think a trader carries that sort of firepower? She's one of the Anti-Traction League's top agents. She'll stop at nothing to hurt us poor traction towns. It was her who planned that bomb that sank Marseilles, and her what sang with the poor Sultana of Palau Penang. She's got the blood of 1,000 murdered townsfolk on her hands. Still, we'll show her, won't we, Tom? I'll have her guts for goulash. I'll hang her carcass out for the buzzards. Mungo, Boggo, Mags, an extra cut of the spoils to whoever shoots down that red airship." No one did shoot down that red airship. It was long out of range, buzzing back towards the Black Island to warn Airhaven of the approaching danger. But Tom could not have been more filled with grief and anger if he had seen it falling in flames. So that was why Miss Fang had rescued him and been so kind. All she had wanted was information for the League, and her friend, Captain Cora, had been in on it, spinning that tale about her just to win Tom's sympathy. Thank Quirk he'd not been able to tell her anything. Tunbridge Wells was battered and burning, but the Jenny Hanover's rockets had been too small to do any serious damage, and now that the element of surprise was lost, Miss Fang did not risk another attack. The suburb chugged on into the east, pushing a thick bore of flame-lit water ahead of it. Tom could see the lights on the Black Island now, lanterns flickering along the shore. Closer, between the island and the suburb, shone another cluster of lights. "Boats!" shouted Mungo, peering through the sight of his gun. Peavy went and stood at the window, robes flapping on the rising breeze. "Fishing fleet," he grunted, sounding satisfied. "First meal of the night. We'll eat 'em up by way of an aperitif. That's starters to you lot." The fishing boats started scattering as Tunbridge Wells bore down, running goose-winged for the shelter of the shore. But one, bigger and slower than the rest, sagged away to windward. "We'll have him," growled Peavy, and Mags relayed his order into the intercom. The suburb changed course slightly, engines grumbling. The steep crags of the Black Island filled the sky ahead, blotting out the eastern stars. What if there are guns on the heights, thought Tom, but if there were any, they stayed silent. He could see the white wake of the boat ahead, and beyond it a faint, pale line of breakers on the shore. And then there were other closer breakers dead ahead, and Hester was shouting, "Peavy, it's a trap!" They all saw it then, but it was much too late. The fishing boat with its shallow keel ran clear through the reef, but the great lumbering bulk of Tunbridge Wells struck at full speed, and the sharp rocks clawed its belly open. The suburb lurched and settled, throwing Tom off his feet and rolling him hard against the legs of the chart table. The engines failed, and in the terrible silence that followed, a klaxon began lowing like a frightened bull. Tom crawled back to the window. Down below, he saw the streets going dark as a great rush of water came bursting through the palisades. White geysers of foam sprayed up through the gratings from the flooded underdeck, and mingled with the whiteness, he saw black flecks of debris and tiny struggling figures. The boat was far away, taking to admire her handiwork. 100 yards of sea separated the doomed suburb from the steep shores of the island. A hand grabbed his shoulder, heaving him towards the exits. "You're coming with me, Tommy," snarled Chrysler Peavy, snatching a huge gun from a rack on the wall and swinging it onto his shoulder. "You too, Amji, Mungo, Mags, you with me?" They were with him, the pirates forming a tight protective knot around the mare as he hurried Tom down the stairs. Hester came limping behind. There were screams below and frightened faces staring up at them from a third-floor landing, already knee-deep in water. "Abandon town!" hollered Peavy. "Woman and mares first!" They crashed into his private quarters, where his daughter stood, clutching her frightened brothers and sisters. Peavy ignored her and waded to a chest in the corner, scowling with concentration as he twirled the combination lock this way and that. The chest sprang open. He dragged out a little orange bundle, and then they were on the move again, out onto the balcony where the sea was already spilling through the railings. Tom turned back into the room, meaning to help Cortina and the children, but Peavy had forgotten all about them. He flung the bundle down into the waves, and it unfolded with a complicated hiss, flowering into a small circular life raft. "Get aboard!" he snapped, taking hold of Tom and thrusting him towards it. "But get aboard!" A boot in the seat of his breeches sent him tumbling over the balcony rail and down onto the yielding rubber floor of the raft. Mungo was next, then the others piled in so fast that the raft wallowed deep and water spilled over the gunwales. "Ah!" wailed Cortina Peavy somewhere away to the left, but by the time Tom had scrambled out from under Mr. Ames, the suburb was already far away, its stern submerged and its bows tilted high into the night sky. He looked for Hester and found her crouching beside him. Peavy's monkey jabbered with fear, bouncing up and down on his head. "Help! Help!" came the distant cries, and there were white splashes, dozens of splashes, as people leaped from the palisades and the useless tatters of the airbags. Hands clutched at the sides of the raft, and Mungo and Peavy beat them away. Frantic figures came splashing through the swell towards them, and Janny Maggs stood up and fired her machine gun, churning up red water all around the raft. The suburb was tilting steeper, steeper. There was a rush of steam as the sea poured into its boilers, and then, with sudden shocking speed, it slid under. The water boiled and heaved. For a while there were screams, faint cries for help, a brief rattle of gunfire as a drifting fragment of debris changed hands, a longer one as a few lucky pirates battled their way onto a beach. Then there was silence, and the raft turning slow circles as the current drew it in towards the shore.